Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. It was a hot and stuffy evening, something you don't get very often here, when my family and I arrived in London. We had traveled for hours to get to our destination, and all we wanted to do was check into our hotel and get some much-needed rest. We had decided to save some money by booking a cheap 3-star hotel in a sketchy area of the city, thinking that we would only be sleeping there and spending the rest of our time exploring the city. The hotel itself was old and rundown, with peeling wallpaper and stained carpets. The reception area was dimly lit, and there was an unpleasant smell that lingered in the air. The staff seemed friendly enough, but we couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. We were given our room key and made our way up to the 3rd floor, dragging our suitcases behind us. As soon as we opened the door to our room, we were hit with a musty smell that made our eyes water. The room was small and cramped, with 2 twin beds and a creaky old dresser. The beds looked like they had seen better days, with thin, worn-out mattresses and lumpy pillows. The air conditioning unit in the corner of the room looked like it hadn't been cleaned in months, and it let out a loud, rattling noise every few minutes. The curtains on the window were thin and faded, barely blocking out any of the light from the street outside. The bathroom was tiny, with a shower that looked like it hadn't been scrubbed in weeks. But despite all of this, we tried to make the best of it. We were exhausted from our travels and just wanted to get some sleep. We unpacked our bags and settled in for the night, hoping that we would wake up feeling refreshed and ready to explore the city. The first night was boring, and we all slept soundly after a long day of sightseeing. But the second night was a different story. I woke up in the middle of the night, feeling cold and disoriented. As I opened my eyes, I noticed that the door to our hotel room was slightly ajar. At first, I thought that maybe one of my family members had gone to the bathroom or to get a drink of water. But as I looked around the room, I realized that something was wrong. The room was freezing cold, and I could see my breath in the air. I got up from the bed and walked over to the window to see if it was open, but it was shut tight. As I made my way back to the bed, I noticed that some of our belongings had been moved around. My sister's purse was on the floor, and my dad's jacket was hanging off the back of a chair. It was as if someone had been searching through our things. I immediately woke up my family, and we all stood there in shock, trying to make sense of what had happened. None of us had any memory of getting up during the night, and there was no evidence of forced entry or any sign that someone had broken in. We tried to call the front desk, but the phone in our room was dead. We eventually managed to get through to the hotel staff using our cell phones, and they sent someone up to check on us. But when we told them what had happened, they didn't seem too concerned. They brushed it off as a simple mistake, saying that sometimes the cleaning staff forget to close the doors properly. We were not convinced by their response, and agitation just kept growing inside us. What if someone had been watching us while we slept? What if they had gone through our things and taken something valuable? All sorts of thoughts ran through our minds, and we knew that we had to be extra cautious from that point on. The next day, we decided to explore the city and try to forget about what had happened the night before. We visited some of the famous landmarks, such as Buckingham Palace and the Tower Bridge, and we even went on a sightseeing tour on one of the famous red double-decker buses. But even as we marveled at the beauty of the city, we all had this feeling that someone was with us in our room that night. As we went back to our rooms in the night, we made sure to block our doors with suitcases and furniture. My dad didn't even sleep that night. We left the next morning as our flight back to Kansas was early morning. I remember that business trip to Spain like it was yesterday. I was excited to explore a new country, meet new people, and of course, do some business. My company had booked me a room and a charming bed and breakfast that had been recommended to us. The place was picturesque, with a lot of old-world charm that I found really appealing. The first day went well. I attended some meetings, went sightseeing, and returned to my room for a good night's sleep. As I drifted off, I couldn't help but notice a small hole in the ceiling. It was about the size of a tennis ball and looked like someone had accidentally drilled into the ceiling. It wasn't something that bothered me, but it was odd. The second night was when things started getting strange. I woke up in the middle of the night, thirsty as hell. I stumbled out of bed and made my way to the kitchen for a glass of water. As I stood there drinking, I glanced up at the hole in the ceiling and froze. My heart began to race as I noticed two eyes peeping through the hole, staring straight at me. My first thought was that someone had broken in and was spying on me. I thought of running back to my room and locking the door, but I was frozen to the spot, unable to move. After a few moments, the eyes disappeared, leaving me shaken and confused. The next morning, I was still unable to explain what I had experienced the night before. I kept thinking about those eyes and what they could have been. I decided to go out to the attic to investigate. When I asked the owner of the bed and breakfast, she looked at me with a puzzled expression and said that the attic was sealed off and no one had been up there in years. I wasn't sure what to think at this point. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But deep down, something really was out of place here. That night, I tried to go to sleep early, but I couldn't. I kept staring up at the hole in the ceiling, wondering if the eyes would appear again. As the night wore on, my imagination began to run wild. I could hear noises in the hallway and footsteps on the stairs. I could feel someone watching me. At around 2 a.m., I heard a loud creaking noise coming from the ceiling. I shot up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't see anything in the darkness, but I knew something was up there. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself that it was probably just the wind or something. But the creaking continued, growing louder and more persistent. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up and decided to investigate. I walked slowly towards the kitchen, trying not to make any noise. As I approached the hole in the ceiling, I could hear movement above me. It sounded like something was shuffling around up there. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. The noise stopped and everything went quiet. I must have stood there for an hour before finally giving up and returning to bed. The next day, I was a mess. I was tired, scared, and unsure of what to do. I decided to cut my trip in Spain short and head home. Told my company that I was feeling a little sick and they didn't really care less. I didn't want to stay in that bed and breakfast any longer than I had to. Looking back on it now, I'm not sure what to make of the whole thing. Was it just my imagination running wild? Or was there something really strange going on in that bed and breakfast? All I know is that I'll never forget those eyes that were staring at me through that hole. It was our 10th anniversary, and my husband and I decided to celebrate by renting a cozy cabin in the mountains of Switzerland. We were both thrilled to get away from our work life after a long time and spend some quality time together. We arrived at the cabin on a sunny afternoon, and the air was crisp and fresh. It was the perfect place to relax and unwind. The cabin was nestled deep in the forest, surrounded by tall trees and a babbling brook. The wood-paneled walls and stone fireplace added to its cozy charm. We spent the first evening cooking dinner, enjoying the beautiful sunset and watching a movie. But as the night wore on, we began to notice strange things happening. I kept hearing creaking and footsteps outside on the porch, but every time we looked, there was no one there. My husband shrugged it off, saying it was probably just the wind. But it felt more than just the wind. Something wasn't right. The awkwardness lingered, and I had this strong feeling of being watched by someone. The next day, we decided to go for a hike in the forest. The sun was shining, and the scenery was breathtaking. But as we were walking back to the cabin, I felt like something was following us. Every time we turned around, there was nothing there. It made my husband and I really uncomfortable. We got back to the cabin and decided to relax for a bit before dinner. That evening, as we were getting ready for bed, we heard strange noises coming from the attic. It sounded like someone was walking around up there, but there was no way anyone could be up there. My husband went up to investigate, but he found nothing. We shrugged it off and went to bed, but the worry and fear was still there. As the nights went on, the strange occurrences continued. Every night, we would hear strange noises coming from the attic, like someone was moving things around or pacing back and forth. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger with each passing night. One night, I woke up to the feeling of someone whispering in my ear. It was a soft, unintelligible whisper that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I sat up in bed, but there was no one there. My husband was fast asleep next to me, and there was no one else in the room. I tried to ignore it and shake it off, but the sense of being watched intensified. The next day, we decided to explore the forest around the cabin. As we walked deeper into the woods, I felt like something was following us. Every time we turned around, there was nothing there, but the feeling persisted. We eventually came across an old, abandoned cabin. It was in a state of disrepair with broken windows and a rotting roof, but as we approached it, I felt like we were being watched. It was like something was peering out at us from the darkness. That night, things came to a head. We were awakened by a loud banging coming from the attic. It sounded like someone was trying to break through the ceiling. We were both terrified, not knowing what to do. We huddled together in bed, waiting for the noise to stop. When it finally did, we packed up our things and left the cabin immediately. We didn't even bother staying for the rest of the week. We just wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. It's been a while since that trip, and I still can't explain what happened. Was it all in our heads, or was there something supernatural going on? All I know is that I've never been so scared in my life. The cabin in Switzerland will always haunt me, and I know my husband was also very scared. He just doesn't admit it. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.